But also, before we cannonball into the mailbag, we do have some not breaking news, but some interesting news to get to as everything happens in Summer League. And I expect a lot more rumors to come out of that soon, if not actual transactions. But Windhorst did say, well, he was making an appearance on Get Up, ESPN show. We believe that the Indiana Pacers are very close to giving Deandre Ayton an offer sheet or executing a sign and trade. We could see something with the Pacers and Ayton happen as early as today. I'm chancing recording this the night before because I don't need to cover the Paolo Banchero game since he will not be playing when he goes up against Chet Holmgren's Oklahoma City Thunder. Was looking forward to that. Kind of sucks we won't see him play, but Banchero was absolutely fantastic and killed it during the games that he did appear in. So the Ayton to Indiana stuff isn't new. I think the fact that it's progressing this quickly might mean that it's no longer going to wait, at least conceptually, on what's going to happen with Kevin Durant, where a lot of the league still feels in limbo. If it's a sign and trade, that transaction can still be folded into the Kevin Durant framework as part of this larger deal. But at the same time, I don't think the Nets actually want Ayton, and his base year compensation always made the deal a little bit more difficult, not a ton, unless you were involving other teams. They just re-signed Nick Claxton. That organization really, really, really likes Day'Ron Sharpe as well. So they might not see investing in a big man as the smartest course of action. You're also going to run into this issue with other big men like Claxton, like Day'Ron Sharpe. But if you're keeping Ben Simmons, it doesn't make sense to have like an Ayton there, who there's some touch away from the basket, but it's more so on like hook shots, fadeaways, not really like a push shot, like could have a little bit of a mid-range game though. And that's just not enough range to justify investing what will be near max money in Ayton. So that is the issue there, that I don't think an Ayton transaction with Indiana one way or the other, I don't think it portends anything about the Kevin Durant sweepstakes necessarily. And if you're Brooklyn, it just makes more sense. I know people are like, well, Ayton hasn't even turned 24. He'll do so later this month. If you're Brooklyn and you want to compete now, but also kind of keep your flexibility, remain young and have room for growth, Ayton makes sense, just not alongside Simmons. Not at that price point anyway. You can approximate a lot of what he's going to give you on defense and offense in a much cheaper fashion, which is clearly how the Suns feel, hence why they haven't signed him. The Pacers Suns issue though. So we're expecting something to happen, whether it's a sign and trade or an outright offer sheet, because the Pacers officially have the cap space to do so. If it does happen, I think it'll probably be via sign and trade for a couple of reasons. Herb Simon has really always liked to operate this way with his colleagues. We saw it with, I think most recently was the Malcolm Brogdon thing with Milwaukee, where they turned that into a sign and trade where they didn't even necessarily need to. I think that's fine in this case as well, and including Brogdon. You're hedging your bets against, okay, well, what can we don't want to give this offer sheet to Ayton, a player we really like, and then just have the Suns match it. If you want to ensure that you're going to get that player, then yes, involving the other teams makes sense. To me, though, if there's like a significant opportunity that the Suns would let Ayton walk, and I don't think that they would, however, I do think there's more variability caked in here than we would expect, just based off everything that's happened since essentially last summer when the extension negotiations began. I just wouldn't like take that to the bank, is my point. So if you think there's like a better than 50% chance the Suns won't match, I don't care about doing right by your colleagues, especially when you're in a market like Indiana. Like, you don't need to send anything back. If you don't think they're going to match, just pay Ayton, and then you could trade Miles Turner elsewhere. The structure that everyone thinks is going to work is Miles Turner for Ayton, and because India has so much cap space, base year compensation doesn't even matter there. That could be the route that this goes. If they end up giving more than that, maybe it's because they believe that Phoenix was a bigger threat to match. I just don't think, I guess it's enviable on the part of Herb Simon to operate in that fashion. But if you truly, and that makes sense, I want to make that clear. It's smart if you think Phoenix or another team dealing with other free agents is going to match. If they're actually not going to, you're under no obligation to help them out. They have the option of paying their own players, so you don't need to help them out. For the Suns' perspective of this, Indiana seems like the cleanest trade partner. You get someone, a Miles Turner. I'm assuming that's what the structure of the deal is going to be, who's going to help you space the floor. Not as good of a rebounder as DeAndre Ayton. You can't play him as high on the defensive end either, but just having that offensive range. I think DeAndre Ayton is probably the more versatile offensive player at this point. When you look at some of his spins, his fadeaways, his hook shots, we've never really seen Miles Turner get to do that in high volume. I don't know if that's something that he could do well. We know he wants a more expanded offensive role. I don't think he would get one in Phoenix. I think he would be a nice fit. I also think I guess he's not underrated as a defender. People understand how valuable of a rim protector he is. I don't think you're losing that much mobility on the perimeter, though, going from Ayton to Miles Turner if you're Phoenix. So I think that's a fine replacement. There would still be a level of uh, an uninspiring offseason if you don't get Kevin Durant and this is your biggest move going from Ayton to Turner. And then, look, the question has to be, well, you don't want to pay Ayton around $30 million a year. Miles Turner's making 18. That's fine for you in the interim. He's going to be a free agent in 2023. What are you willing to pay him? Or is this going to end up being another rental type situation? Because you can't, like, you have to think of the long-term value here too. Deandre Ayton is a fringe all-star at this point in a role that I guess he hasn't loved, it doesn't seem like, but he's grown to excel at, even if he doesn't consistently play with that thrust is what I've been calling it. There are just games where you don't feel his presence a lot. And those, if you want to be a more prominent part, especially of the offensive picture, you can't have as many of those games that he tends to have. With all of that in mind, though, if you're Phoenix, you need to acquire Turner with the intention of paying him. And I don't know, why you'd want to pay Miles Turner as opposed to DeAndre Ayton. Again, I don't think the drop off, insofar as it exists, is even that massive. They're different types of players where I do think that Turner is more of a shot blocking floor spacer, and that's more of a specialist than what Ayton does. Is like, I think he's an understated defender, like can actually be sort of the backline anchor. But we've also I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words here. We've also never even seen Miles Turner in mass without Domantas Sabonis. He covered up a lot, I think, for Sabonis during their time in Indy together. So I don't think the Pacers are giving away nothing, even if they didn't plan on paying Miles Turner. I don't know that this is a no-brainer decision for them. My point is with Phoenix is you can't just acquire Miles Turner without the intention of have that be the primary part of your return and then have that be like, that's it. Like, if you need to acquire him with the intention of paying him unless other stuff is coming back, if I'm Indy, I'm fighting against that because we know that Phoenix probably wants to not cut payroll because they're paying more to a center now than they were paying Ayton if they do get Turner. That being said, if you have to include like that pick you got from Boston in 2023, and then maybe if I was Phoenix, I love O'Shea Brissett, and I think Indy loves O'Shea Brissett. That dude can defend all over the place, and if he hits his threes, continues to hit them at a high enough clip, that's just super valuable. And there's some on-ball skills there too, but just the defense and then like not compromising any of your offensive geometry, your floor geometry is huge. But why would you give up that much if you're Indy, knowing that you could just sign him outright? You really have to believe then that Phoenix is going to match. And I don't know that they've sent the message around the league consistently enough or firmly enough that they'll do that. The fact that he hasn't signed one or that another team aside from Indy hasn't tried to give him one, maybe that's part of it. I also have to acknowledge that the big man market is always just sort of wonky here. So, and I know for a fact that DeAndre Ayton really wanted to get to the Spurs, and then them pivoting away from DeJounte Murray sort of made that just like, it was never going to happen. So I get this from the Suns, and I get it from the Pacers. DeAndre Ayton, you have all the cap flexibility in the world. We can talk about, should you be paying someone who's, even though he's only 24, he is a non-all-star at the moment. Unless you project him to be the guy, does it make sense to do that so early into what feels like a rebuild? Like, you're coming off of half a season, like you're half a season into this rebuild where you hit that reboot button. But cap space doesn't go as far in a market like Indy. We romanticize it. They can take on bad contracts with all these picks. We also, like, that's fine. You could go that route, but I don't think you're under any obligation. And DeAndre Ayton is young enough to grow with you. He has not aged himself anywhere near out of a full tilt rebuild. And the other thing to consider is just like Indy's books are so flexible moving forward. There's not a bad contract on their ledger right now. There's not even a long-term contract on their ledger. It's, yeah, like right now, Daniel Tice or TJ McConnell, and those salaries aren't guaranteed. Those are the only players who are under contract for more than 2 more seasons. Like, there's no player, let's phrase it this way, there's no player on Indy's books right now who has guaranteed money beyond 23, 24. And so we know that Halliburton's going to be part of that picture. He's slated for restricted free agency. They'll probably extend him. My point is, you're not compromising anything by paying Ayton. That, if it doesn't work out, or let's just say he doesn't provide the necessary bang for your buck, that is your one overpaid player as of right now. So if you're looking at it through that lens, it also doesn't matter. The question really is, do you believe that he makes sense as sort of an anchor for the future? Because what I do think you give up here is, yes, you have your high draft pick coming out of this year. You also have Chris Duarte already on the roster. You have O'Shea Brissett, like I said, so you can view yourself as more in the advanced stages. And I also don't know why I called Benedict just the pick from this year. So you have him, who just looks like he's going to be infinitely scalable in the NBA. You can sort of make the move to be like, all right, well, we just need to advance this. Halliburton's already really good. We have players who can make an impact, and the Pacers have never operated on this, full scale teardown mode. This is really the closest that they've come in my memory, what they did this past season, making that sort of partial year tank. So I get that. But do you think that Deandre Ayton is the guy in the situation that's going to accelerate this process? I honestly don't know. I think this is probably Caitlin Cooper phrased this, I believe, on Twitter and hit it on the head. This feels like a vote of confidence in Tyrese Halliburton more than anyone, saying that he's just ready now, can run the show now. You want a superior, an elite pick and roll partner for him now. And I think that's totally fine to agree with. You're not going to get that in Miles Turner has like one element to his pick and roll game, and it's really picking and popping. DeAndre Ayton has like a little bit of pop, but not so much. He's just a harder roller, has more of a variable touch around the basket. I love what the pick and roll duo between Halliburton and Ayton could do there. And then if you're surrounding those two with enough shooting, that could be super, super dangerous. And you're also, again, I don't think you drop off a ton defensively going from Ayton to Turner. I think if I had to push, I might call Ayton the more versatile defender, and Turner could technically be the more impactful one, if that just makes any sense to anybody. But I'm still curious as to like what else is there to explore with DeAndre Ayton. And we saw for a stretch him going about his offensive business without Chris Paul. There are some doubts to me I have some doubts, about his self-creation game. Again, I don't think we've seen it in a high enough volume for me to render this verdict. But is there going to be more aggression when we're talking about facing up and attacking guys there? Can he go up with more force when he is attacking at points? That consistency needs to be put together. And it also just gets a little bit harder when you're not playing with a Devin Booker and a Chris Paul at the same time. Most of his court time was spent as almost the third option for the Suns. And when you're also reliant on other people to set you up a ton, if you increase the self-creation, you're just going to become a more prominent focal point of the defense by default. I don't think it's an undefensible or an inexplicable gamble by the Pacers. I do think it's a little bit of a gamble. You really have to believe that there is a lot more to plumb from Ayton on the offensive end. At the same time, if you just believe, and I thought Halliburton really shined when you're looking at his ISO game or his agency over Indy's offense when he came over there. I thought he showed even more than he did in Sacramento, in large part because he was just given the freedom to do so. So if you already view him as the guy, you don't need Ayton to ever be the guy. I think at this point, you're looking at him to, it's either him or Chris Duarte when you're looking at the players on the roster right now. You'd like them to anchor the Tyrese Halliburton-less units. I don't know. Chris Duarte, to me, would have a better chance, his offensive package, of doing so than with Ayton. I get the interest, though. It would just be a very intriguing gamble, and I would still call it a gamble to make when you're so early into this process. He's so young and already so good. And Tyrese Halliburton, I think the more important thing here, is already just amazing. That maybe it just makes a ton of sense from that perspective. And you're looking at a deal that's probably, even if it's 3+1, it can't be longer than 4 years. And again, just looking at how early you are into this project, by the time that, to phrase it this way, by the time that Tyrese Halliburton's on his next contract, DeAndre Ayton is going to be half over. And so, there is that light at the end of the tunnel argument to be made, even if things don't pan out. This feels like a very aggressive and decisive move by the Pacers. And I'm going to be fascinated by how the partnership, if this goes through, turns out with Halliburton and what other moves are left there for them. I think you also probably need to make sure that you're pairing him with Ayton, specifically with guys who can shoot at the 4. That's not a problem with what Jalen Smith did last year. I do view him as more of a 5 defensively, but offensively, he can do the things of a 4, even if you're just counting on him for stationary shooting. And you can also just go with lineups where maybe they're a little bit smaller, but if you have Duarte healed and Halliburton on the court, you're ensuring yourself of 3 shooters at all times. And even Brissett, we've seen be able to downsize. So maybe that's a potential lineup. Having a true 5 on the floor helps you do those things. I really hope we don't see any Goga Batadze, DeAndre Ayton minutes if that happens. I don't think we would see Isaiah Jackson 8 minutes either. But it's it's for a Pacers team. I would say it's a move that the level of aggression to go after Ayton now and to actually make it a sign and trade rather than just get him outright. If it's not an entirely different story, but it would be a lot different to me if you were just signing him and then maybe you're trading Turner elsewhere. Or maybe dual bigs are in vogue. We actually have a question on that in a second. Maybe you try playing them together because of the way that Miles Turner shoots. I'd be intrigued to see that. But it does feel like they're more, if you want to ensure that Phoenix isn't going to match, I would still feel differently or like this move a lot better if you had the option of moving Miles Turner elsewhere or even just keeping him to maximize your asset plays. It just feels a tinge too aggressive for me, given the stage at which the Pacers are at. But I also acknowledge just knowing I don't know what else I really want them to do. It's the alternative would be letting this core marinate, essentially, maybe trading Turner and Hield, seeing what you could get for them, letting them marinate as expected, or marinate or more organically without immediate reinforcement, and then you're prioritizing a high 2023 pick before you go and make moves like this. There's that could be the right way, but also this isn't necessarily the wrong way. Ayton is so young. So those are my thoughts there. At this point, it does feel like Ayton is going to end up in Indiana or Phoenix. If the fact that Wendy mentioned the potential for an offer sheet, I think if you see the Pacers do that, you really know that they don't expect Phoenix to match, or maybe they were getting fed up and tired of waiting for Phoenix to figure out what they were doing with Kevin Durant, and perhaps they're trying to lock them into something that would make their transactions a little bit more difficult, or they would just have to float Ayton for until he's trade eligible around December, January, depending on what date is fixed in there. They don't tend to operate that way, which is why if they did throw an offer sheet out there rather than make this a sign and trade, I'm not sure if it would be more of a harbinger of frustration with the Suns or that they really believe Phoenix won't match. And I'll say this, I don't expect this to be the case, but if the Suns just let Ayton walk, if this is not a sign and trade, if they decide not to match, that is franchise malpractice of the highest order. And I don't know who would be more responsible, whether it's a James Jones or a Robert Sarver thing. I know the relationship between Ayton and Monty Williams and CP3 is supposed to be too far gone. You cannot let a fringe star at the entering his age 24 season just leave for nothing. And that's why I don't expect it to be a possibility. I want to make that clear. But since it's technically a possible outcome of all this, would be an absolute unmitigated disaster on the Suns' behalf. And they would need to be vilified should that happen. Again, I don't expect it to. That's my thought on Ayton to the Suns, though. Just a situation we'll be monitoring, and I imagine there's some fireworks left as it pertains to this. Let's move on.